I'm Louis Moroni, and this is Constraints the Podcast from Hi-Fi Handiwork, a 20-episode series. Each episode is a chat with a guest from a creative industry about a project obstacle they've experienced, viewed through the lens of project management's three constraints of scope, time, and budget. Further insights and commentary can be found in the show notes. We hope you enjoy the program. Creative industries, as the producer of ideas and experiences, are ubiquitous. Oftentimes, one creative industry can encompass another creative industry. The fashion industry, for example, a creative industry, displays and promotes its designs with the production of live fashion shows, encompassing set design, a creative industry, lighting design, a creative industry, and music, a creative industry. The fashion shows contribute to the brand's marketing efforts, creative industry, and is just a component of a larger plan that encompasses television commercials, a creative industry, social media campaigns, a creative industry, magazines, a creative industry, retail displays, and trade show displays, creative industries, just to name a few. All of these endeavors, accomplished by driven and talented people engaged in separate activities, are ultimately encompassed by a seed of an idea, paradoxically also in the center, born in the minds that designed the original clothing line. This encompassing movement of creative industries doesn't always take the same form. For instance, today's guest on Constraints was a quintessential writer since before I knew her in our university days. I distinctly remember walking with her on campus and learning that she had written her first novel in high school. She might correct me on that. Since then, she has not only built a career in the book, retail, and publishing industry, living through the uncertainty of the impact of ebooks on the written word, to now working with a thriving community of online self-published authors, but she is also an accomplished writer, having published a novel and multiple stories of short fiction. Hers is a different encompassing, where her love for the written word is the seed that has placed her in the center of the creative industries of book writing, promoting, finding and publishing the written word for, I'm guessing, most of her waking hours. So now let's further encompass our guest with the creative industry of podcasting in a discussion about another creative industry encompassed by writing. Claire Humphrey, welcome to Constraints.
Louis, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here today.
Great. Well, I am very excited to have you here, and it's just always nice to see you. So let's jump right in. You have a project obstacle to share with us.
Yes. So when my first novel came out, it's called Spells of Blood and Kin, and it came out in 2016, published by St. Martin's. I, as a writer, realized that the days of publishers paying a lot to send authors all over the world to promote their book are over. That is not something publishers really do anymore. And in an ever-changing landscape where promotion happens primarily online, the problem that I faced was how to get word of my book out there. What was the best way for me to publicize, knowing that the burden was on me to do it and that my publisher was not really going to do much for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was surprised at just how little they do, but that's partly because the goal of publishing now, instead of taking authors and promoting them from scratch, they're looking for authors who have a bit of a platform themselves, and they expect those authors to use that platform.
Right.
So they thought of me as an author with enough of a platform or a fan base that my book was worth investing in, but they really needed me to leverage whatever capital I had to get my book in front of people, which kind of raised the question, how on earth do I do that?
Okay, so you've been given no money, correct?
Exactly.
How much time did you have? Or did you have time?
Well, I have a full-time day job, so
Right.
I didn't have tons of time. I told myself I would use as much vacation time as I had available to me that year to promote my book. And of course, I had some budget attached to that vacation time that I would have spent traveling in a normal year that I decided to put toward my book.
Wow.
And my very lovely mother gave me $1,000 to put toward my book. So I did have a bit of budget. And obviously, it's a privilege as a writer to have a day job that affords you some time and some money and some flexibility. There aren't any restrictions for me on when I can take my vacation time or how much of it I can take at a time. So I did have some options in front of me that not all writers have. If I was a full-time writer, all of those obstacles probably would have been a lot more severe, especially as a debut where you haven't made any money yet.
So in terms of what the book, do we call it a book tour?
We did call it a book tour.
So in terms of what the book tour was, would you say it was what really was, I guess it was the money that really constrained what you were going to do or could do?
It was both money and time, because even though I had some flexibility, there's a limit to how much time I was allowed to take in the year. And I had to be smart about when to take it to get the biggest return on my investment. I couldn't take 4 weeks straight and just, go around the world doing nothing but book tour. But also, I became aware pretty quickly that there were key time periods around the launch of the book when it was most important to make a splash. And so I really had to focus on those times as much as possible.
What were those times?
About 3 months before the launch, I was surprised that it started this early, but the book needed reviews and I needed to be at conferences being really visible and promoting myself and looking like a writer with a lot of attention and a lot of platform so that bookstores would order my book.
Because that's sort of the timeline, 3 months
Exactly.
in advance of the book launch. Okay.
Exactly.
Great. Okay.
And this was 2016, so online shopping was really important, but in-person print shopping was also really important, and it still is to the success of a book. If you can find your book in bookstores, you've got a leg up on a lot of other debut authors.
Right.
So I really wanted to make sure that I was getting that profile early enough that book buyers would notice it and pay attention.
Okay.
And then there was another phase right around the launch itself where your sales in your first week are super important. If you make a lot of sales in your first week, you can hit a bestseller list. And even if you don't hit a bestseller list, it sort of establishes in the mind of everybody within the industry how powerful is your book going to be through its lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
It causes people to reorder if the sales are good. It causes reviewers to pay attention. It's there's a bit more press attention. The longer you have to wait to make it big, the more likely it is that your stock of your book is just going to get returned before anybody even sees it.
Right.
So it doesn't really do me any good if I was to wait a year and then start making a big splash. By then, my book might be out of print already.
Okay, so did you say there were 3 main times, or those are the 2 main times?
Those are the 2 main times. And then I guess just the 3 months of the book being on sale in bookstores.
Mm-hmm.
The sales within that 3 months determine whether bookstores are going to keep it.
Right.
If it doesn't do well in those 3 months, then they're going to start returning it and replacing it with something else.
Right. I got it. Okay, so then in terms of budget, you had money, but what about, were there people that were helping you?
Yeah, that's an important one too. I did have a publicist whose job was primarily to liaise with places where I had already planned events. So I kind of thought that maybe the publicist would plan events for me, but that wasn't the case. I needed to do the legwork.
Worked for the publisher.
Yes.
Publicist, yeah.
And that publicist would then do a little bit of follow-up for me to make sure that they reminded the event place of anything that I would need and that there was going to be stock of my book available there for me to sign and stuff like that. Because fortunately, I really needed the help on that. That was a little bit challenging keeping up with all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my resource, was that publicist. And then other than that, I teamed up with a fellow author because he had a debut coming with the same publisher at the same time. And he and I decided that we could do more together than apart. And that turned out to be a perfect idea because his publicist was a little more effective than mine. And that person ended up doing a little bit more of that legwork for both of us that I wasn't really entitled to. It was just nice that they did it. And also his network of friends and acquaintances was different from mine. And so between us, we had access to a lot more different options for events, different communities where people would host us so that we could make our budget go further, different stores where somebody knew somebody who could get us an event. And so we started that quite early in the process, making a really long list of everybody all over North America where we thought, okay, we've got somebody's spare bedroom we can sleep in. We've got somebody who we think is willing to host us for an event and might bring somebody to it. Or we've just got a lot of friends who might show up for one or the other or both of us to make the event a success. Because of course you want to have good social capital with the people you do events with. You don't want to be, talking yourself up and hyping everything and then have like a measly 3 people show up to buy the book.
Right.
It's a little embarrassing when that happens. And it did happen at a couple of places.
Right.
But primarily we had great crowds and it was because there were 2 of us there. And so at least one of us usually had some fans and some following in each of the places that we went to.
Very cool. So, and you didn't feel competitive at all between each other? Your books were...
No, our books
different?
were actually quite different. His was science fiction and mine was dark fantasy.
Right.
And we weren't really appealing to the same audience. So that was maybe a bit of a drawback in that people wouldn't necessarily want to read both books. They might just want to read one. But in practice, we did find a lot of people bought both because I think we played well off of each other in the events. And also, once you've gotten somebody to show up in person,
Right.
they feel a little bit awkward not buying the book,
Right.
which is part of why events work so well to sell books.
Would you, just out of curiosity, this is a little bit of an aside, would you do the same thing with the same author or a different author again in the future?
Hands down, yes, definitely. Yeah, we had a really good time traveling together. We got a little bit of a patter going. We did about a dozen events together, and we already knew each other and were comfortable with each other on stage. And so that really helped a lot, just to reduce our nerves and, make for a more fun presentation to the audience, so that it wasn't just kind of purely a dry reading of the book.
Right. Oh, well, that actually also sounds like you'd probably encourage each other in writing if you needed, like if you decided, hey, we got to do this again, let's do it in 2026.
That's
Then
true.
it's like, let's get
Yes.
those books written.
Yeah, and he and I actually met through a writing group, and we remain friends to this day.
Oh, that's very cool. Okay, so now 3 months and a week before, and then the 3 months of after the book is on sale. So how far in advance of that 3 month point were you having, like, did you start working on this on the tour?
That's a great question. And actually, the publicist had the first job in all of that, which I think was quite far in advance of the pre-launch, which was sending out advance copies to people I didn't know, including all the reviewers at the industry magazines.
Hmm.
And that's something that they take really seriously, and they should, because the industry magazines, Publishers Weekly and Kirkus, those aren't really read by the general public, but they are read by booksellers and librarians. And if you get good reviews there, it persuades those booksellers and librarians that they need to bring in your book and that their customers and their readers are going to like it. So the publicist sent out this vast amount of mailings to those industry publications and a bunch of online reviewers and blogs and YouTubers and people like that. And some of those people read the book and reviewed it, and that was what got the initial buzz going.
Oh, good. Like, how much did your experience in your day job actually inform or help you in approaching the book tour? Which I'm really interested in getting to the nitty gritty of what your tour looked like. But
It was helpful in the sense that I knew just how much importance booksellers would attach to those early numbers and to those reviews. And so I was really committed to getting that as good as possible. But it was also a little bit alarming because I know just how many books fail, even though everybody did everything right.
Right.
And even what you can call a success is a little bit hard to define. One of the typical ways that authors will define success is, did you earn out your advance? Meaning, did you sell enough copies to justify the paycheck that the publisher decided to give you from the get-go? Mm-hmm. I did, so I felt like that was a success. But you don't know until the book has been out for a year whether that's going to happen. So there's a long period of waiting before you sort of find out whether you're a success. And there's a lot of time in there where you feel like you're doing all of these things, but you don't know what the result is. There's a lot of it that you can't see even when you're in the industry. And of course, because of conflict of interest policies, there's a lot of stuff that I might technically be able to see, but I can't look at.
Right.
So that was important too. I couldn't be sitting there like looking up my book in sales databases. That wouldn't be appropriate. So
right.
I was as completely in the dark as any other debut author in almost every way.
And of course, the success of your first book doesn't end there. You have dreams of writing more books, and so the success of your first book is going to contribute to what whether it's your next book or your future short stories. That's currency that pays forward.
Exactly, yeah. And being able to say that, yes, you had a successful first book that won an award and earned out its advance is money in the bank for future contracts. Mm-hmm. But it still doesn't guarantee future contracts. And that's another way where I sort of remain in the dark. You will notice I don't have a second book out yet. Mm-hmm. That's another long story. We can do another podcast about that.
That'd be good. But you love writing, and you always have loved writing.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you feel great about your success so far.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the tour. Let's talk about sort of, can you just describe it? Like, what was where did you start? Where did you end? And then what were the highlights in the middle? How about that?
Yes, absolutely. So we started in Toronto. We had a launch at one of the Indigo stores, which was amazing, extremely well attended. There was one major obstacle, which was the power went out in the mall the day of the launch. And I got some very frantic texts from people going, we're moving the entire event downstairs into a courtyard where there's backup power. And I was like, oh no, this is the kiss of death. This isn't going to go well. I'm so nervous. But it turned out it was even better because not only did we get all of the people who planned to attend, and all of them bought books and we had great sales, we also got a lot of bystanders who were walking through the courtyard who were like, wow, what's going on here? And stopped to watch and then bought books and got them signed. So that was delightful.
Has Indigo since then decided to do those types of events in that courtyard again because of that experience?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer.
Well, that's a really good example of, if I'm going to just, continue with the scope, budget, and time, but there's a happy accident to the scope of your event that actually made it better.
Yes, exactly.
That was
Exactly.
a positive risk.
Yep.
Or, anyway. Okay. So then, great first start.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
it was a fantastic first
that
start.
was with your writing book partner?
Yep. His name is Curtis Chen, by the way, author of Waypoint Kangaroo and the Kangaroo series. So he flew into Toronto and stayed with me for a couple of days while we did that event. Then he did a couple more Canadian events on his own, and I went west and I stayed with family members in Calgary and Vancouver and did store events at a couple of Indigo stores there.
Was it because you had family to stay with that you did events in those?
Exactly.
So Curtis Chen, where's he from? And basically, did he have to take the same approach, take time off? Did he have a day job?
He did not have a day job. He's a full-time writer from Portland. And so he had a lot more friends on the West Coast than I did. And he did a couple of East Coast events without me, and I did these Canadian events without him. Mm-hmm. And then we met up again in LA, where we did multiple store events in LA, San Francisco, San Diego. And then we went road tripping up the coast. We hit Seattle, Portland, and Bellingham, Washington.
And how did you get from place to place?
We drove.
Oh, wow. Drove like a rental, or?
We drove Curtis's car, he and his wife, and myself and my husband. The four of us road tripped the whole way. And we stayed in mostly friends' houses. I think we did get a hotel a couple of times, but we had friends all over the place. And most memorably was probably in San Francisco. We stayed with friends of Curtis, and where I slept was in a VW van that was parked in their garage, which was extremely comfortable. Highly recommend.
Right. Despite the fact that you didn't have a big budget and great hotels to stay in and fly from place to place, probably your memories of this tour, like, really memorable.
Oh, absolutely. It was epic. I felt like it was a lot like getting married. It was one of those once in a lifetime events that I'd been looking forward to my whole life. I'd always been convinced that I was going to be a published novelist, and here it was. I am ready to live my dream. Some of it doesn't look exactly like how I pictured it. When I was a kid, authors got a lot more budget and these events were more swanky. And I didn't kind of expect to be, living out of a car to do my book launch. But at the same time, a lot of people never get to do it. And, this was as much of my dream as I could build with what I had. And it was so worth it.
This is a 3-month in advance. How long was that tour?
The tour started on launch day and went about 3 weeks. And so there was a lot of driving in between all of the places. And every place that we stopped, we tried to do more than one event if we could, even if it was just stopping into a store and signing some stock. So there were a lot of signed copies of both of our books all over the West Coast. And then we ended in Portland at a conference. And now this wasn't the first conference I did in support of the book. So the pre-3-month mark.
Sorry, when you say conference, what are these conferences? They're
Oh,
book
good
fairs?
question. They're sort of literary conferences for science fiction and fantasy readers.
Oh, okay.
And they're usually a few days of panel discussions and signings, and sometimes costume events. They're aimed at fans, and the authors who attend will go through a round of panels and just fun events talking about not just our own work, but how to write, tropes in work, things that we all love. Like sometimes there will be panels about a particular author who everybody loves and how great their work is. And so it can be a little bit academic. It can be sort of fan oriented. Either way, it's a really fun thing to do as an author because you just get to talk about books with other authors and sign some stuff for people. And of course, signing for people never gets old. That's super fun.
Did you ever have any trouble getting into any of these conferences?
No, actually, the conferences are always looking for authors who have something out that might be big because they make their bread and butter by attendees who want to come and see authors, and they want a different group of authors. Most conferences run every year, and so the organizers really want new people to come so that their attendees don't get tired of it. And they want the same old people that are well-loved as well. And so there are people that will go to the same conferences every year and kind of have a base there. But as somebody who hadn't done conferences on the West Coast before, those are really fun for me because I met fans I wouldn't have had a chance to meet otherwise. And they got to say, hey, I met Claire Humphrey at this conference.
And book launches, there must be a book launch season. Like these conferences, do they all sort of happen around the same time?
Surprisingly not. They happen kind of all year round. And I think partly is about competition. You don't want to have all the conferences happening at the same time because then people wouldn't be able to go to all of them. And there are people that use all their vacation time to just go to conferences and meet authors.
Mm.
As you can imagine, it's kind of a small, dedicated group of fans who are that keen that they want to meet authors in person every year.
Right.
So you do kind of see the same people over and over. And there are only so many trips that they're willing to take. So there are, maybe 5 or 6 big ones and then a bunch of more local, smaller ones. And so that year I hit up a couple of the big ones and I think 3 smaller ones, both before and after the launch. And the last one was part of the tour that Curtis and I ended up at in Portland, which was kind of his local one that he had been to before. And that was a really great way. We had a party and that was a really great way to finish off the tour with a bang.
Oh, very cool. Since you've done, this was 2016.
Mhm.
So since then, have you scheduled any of your regular vacations to align with a conference that you attend and as a
Yeah.
guest?
Yeah, absolutely. I've gone back. I've done conferences most years up until COVID. And since then, I haven't done any in person.
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to getting back to them, but it really disrupted the conference landscape. And there are a lot of people in the writing community and in the fan community who are quite COVID cautious, even still. And it's not the same environment that it was. Some people won't travel as much as they used to, and some people will, but won't do the sort of social things around the conference. And to me, one of the best things about those conferences was the feeling of your whole community kind of gathering in a bar and the endless conversations and, hallway chats and breakfasts and dinners with people. And that atmosphere hasn't really felt the same to me, as far as I can tell. It's taken a lot longer to recover than some of the other sort of public events that we see around us.
Like, I imagine book signings at bookstores are probably what they used to be.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly Indigo returned to doing events like that about a year ago, and they're doing more than ever. It's really nice to see.
Mhm.
And so that aspect of a book tour would be easy for authors to recreate now.
To a certain extent, do you, I mean, I'm not even sure what I'm asking. I guess if you had launched at COVID times, your tour, I'm assuming, would have been virtual.
Yeah,
It,
yeah.
it would have cost a lot less money. It
Yep.
would have been, you wouldn't have had to take vacation time. The memories, I'm sure, would not be as good. So, do you know of anyone, or have you witnessed that experience of a book tour by other authors, and can you compare that to what you had?
Yeah, absolutely. I did actually attend a couple of virtual conferences during COVID, and I have since. And of course, the convenience element is really lovely, to be able to not set aside the entire weekend and pay for an expensive plane ticket, but just pop into a couple of panels when you feel like it. I've done some of those panels myself. And you're right, it is a much more dry experience. The conversations and the panels are fantastic, but then you log out and there you are, just at your desk with your cat, and you don't have that spontaneity. You don't have that really electric feeling of being in conversation with your whole community. And I think it's a wonderful option, but I don't think it's the same environment at all. That said, would I still do that when I tour my next book? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's wonderful to be able to attend at all, even if you can't attend in person. And of course, there are people who can't attend conferences at all anytime, right? People with disabilities, people who don't have any budget, people who just live on the other side of the world. And, flying from Asia is so much harder than flying from Canada when you have an event in California.
So when you started your tour, you had a plan. You had a route that you were planning to take. You knew you were going to drive together. You knew how much money you had and where you were going to spend that, and all of the different events. I'm assuming you had known which events you were going to go to. With, it sounds like, maybe a couple impromptu events that you hadn't planned. How, in retrospect, did your plan match what happened?
The plan matched the reality pretty fully. The one part that I didn't end up executing was I had a whole Ontario piece that I wanted to conduct in the summer. And by the time it got around to needing to plan that would have been toward the end of the 3 months after launch. I was so tired and I had spent my entire budget, and I wasn't totally convinced that I was getting the orders and the sales that I thought I would be getting from all this activity. And I made the decision not to plan any further events after I got back from the Portland conference.
Was that frustrating?
It was. I felt very ambivalent about it, and I kind of still do, because you only get that particular time to make that impression with people. And I think of myself as somebody with tons of energy and stamina, right? And I thought, why am I feeling so exhausted? Why am I not able to contemplate doing yet another round of events, even though I know what's at stake here could be my whole future?
Mm-hmm.
Not to be too dramatic about it. I mean, I don't think in hindsight that was true, but it felt at the time like, ooh, I might be really letting myself down. And I still don't know for sure what I could have had if I had continued on with all of those plans. But the fact of it was, I got sick at the end of the conference and I just was feeling super run down. I had then used up all my vacation time, and anything else that I was going to do, I would have had to take as unpaid leave, and the stakes of that felt higher. And, that would start to then risk my social capital at my day job. And that's a really important thing for me as well. So that was the decision I made. And I remained frustrated about it for about a year. And then I got the news that I had earned out my advance. And so I felt like, whew, I didn't let myself down that badly.
It also felt that, I mean, the way you've described it, it sounds like it was the kind of the perfect time to end. You had spent everything you could, both with money and your energy,
Mm-hmm.
and you had actually accomplished everything that you had planned to accomplish, that sort of extra thing at the end. What did your publisher think of your success?
They were initially really happy about it. Editor was very supportive. She was fantastic to work with. But I noticed that they weren't super communicative by that summer. And I wasn't sure, did that mean their focus had just moved on? I wasn't really sure what was happening. And it turned out that they were going through some restructuring, and my editor left, and several other editors also left at the same time. So that kind of explained to me why my relationship with them didn't seem as solid as it had at the beginning. And so I was one of many authors who were orphaned by those changes, and something that happens to a lot of authors in their career, where you lose the editor who acquired you, and then you don't really have an ally within your own publishing house. And that, it doesn't necessarily mean anything for your career, but it can, and it did for me, because I had been intending to write a whole series. And, the second editor that I was assigned to really didn't want to continue a series where he hadn't been the one to acquire it, and he didn't want to have to get up to speed partway through when the book had wrapped up solidly enough that it wasn't like readers would have been left completely hanging.
Right.
There was the option for a sequel, but there wasn't the need for a sequel. So we mutually at that point parted ways. I decided not to work with that editor.
Oh my goodness. You have to have such a passion for writing, which I've said this, I know you do, but I mean, I know you're also an amazing writer. I read your book. I really enjoyed it. And that's a great story. I mean, you basically became your own project manager for your own book tour. And it sounds like this is not uncommon now. It's sort of the way things are with authors, which is interesting to learn.
I think it's almost required now. And it's certainly, even if you have a lot of support from your publisher, or you happen to be one of the people who's at the very, very top of the marketing pyramid and is getting the most possible resources, that still doesn't let you off the hook for thinking of it as your project to manage, and, working toward your own outcomes and doing everything you can to make it a success. I think that the days of an author being sort of a passive part of the product to be consumed are over. The author really we have to steer our own careers. We have to pay attention to all of the market forces out there, and all of the avenues that we have to put our work in front of people, because that's the end goal, is that moment where a fan comes up to you and they look teary-eyed and they're like, I can't believe I got to meet you. Please sign my book. That is worth its weight in gold.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I hope people listen to this podcast and they reach out to you. How can they do that? How can they find you?
An easy way to find me is my website, which is clairehumphrey.ca.
Great. All right. Well, Claire, really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for being on Constraints. I'm sure we'll talk again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight.
All right. Constraints the podcast receives resource support from the Alan Slate Radio Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University and is co-produced by Louis Moroney and Mihir Kore. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts to automatically be notified when a new episode is posted. Also, follow us on Instagram at constraints_podcast. Constraints the podcast is brought to you by Hi-Fi Handiwork. Sound advice.